I don't know if it's the disappointments of the last couple Octobers because of their age, because the Dodgers look loaded again. I don't know what it is, but I am not entering this season with the same World Series expectations that I've had in the last 2 years. I don't. I think they can win it, but I don't expect it the way I did a year ago. 215-592-94.9 for Hugh. It's interesting. This group has stayed pretty much the same for 3 years. And 3 years ago, they got the closest they've been, right? They were winning the World Series 2-1, and then the Astros came back and took it. 2 years ago, they're up 3-2 on the Diamondbacks, and then they blew it. Last year, they get knocked out quickly by the Mets. Hugh, as we enter 2025, we're 3 weeks from today is opening day. Do you still have World Series expectations?
Yes. Okay. Yes, I do. And I'll tell you why. I think for them, going into every season, you have to have expectations of getting to the big game. I was telling you a story this morning about even when I was a Jet, and we went 3-13 the first year. Mm-hmm. You know, you still had aspirations of being one of those playoff teams.
Probably shouldn't have.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. But I will say to that, the next year with that same group of guys, after we went 1-15, we were one game away of going to the playoffs. And then when I left, they eventually got there, I should say. But I think you have that every year. What I think has happened is this, is that every year they've went into this. The first year was somewhat of a surprise. The second year was more of a goal and it was a disappointment. The third year was definitely a goal where they wanted to come out and they said they wanted to win the most games and they did everything they wanted to do, but they still fell short.
Yep.
I think this year it's more tempered optimism. If that makes sense to a lot of people. I think that every year the goal is to get there. But now, you know, you it's still on your mind, but you're not speaking it into existence as much because you know how the season played out. I think your biggest goal this year is to just try to stay consistent and figure out how to get to the playoffs and not have that power outage that you've had over the last couple of seasons. I think that's the biggest goal because we know this team during the regular season is pretty darn good.
Yep.
You know, they figure out ways to win, but it's just that in that playoff scenario, that's when they have their trouble. So I think that they're going into this thing thinking, okay, we know we got the regular season. We're going to be a playoff team. We just need to figure out how to keep this thing going so that we don't have those power outages in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think the other thing for me is the last couple of years they've had a boost, or at least 2 years ago they had a boost, right? They've added, 3 years ago they added Castellanos and Schwarber to a team that was trying to figure out how to win, and then they got over the hump and got to a World Series. Then 2 years ago they added Turner, and that was supposed to be like jet fuel to take them even further. And look, I guess they've won more games, but they haven't gone further with Trey Turner. Last year, they didn't add much, but it felt like they were like really determined. And they did get off to a great start, and they rode that to the playoffs. There hasn't been a boost this offseason. Like it's the same team. So when you start telling me what you are, I got to believe you at some point. And the Phillies are a good team. But at times, we've seen it in October, they could be a flawed team. 215-592-94.9 for Bryce Harper yesterday. He was on with the afternoon show. And I thought this was interesting, talking about his motivation and maybe having a little extra motivation because he just watched the Eagles have a parade down Broad Street a few months ago.
Yeah, it's sick. I mean, why would you not want it? You know, anytime that you're able to win, and especially in the city of, brotherly love, man, it's I heard it's the best thing in the world. So I heard that all through my career with Jason. I mean, that's all he talked about, So all those guys come back. That's what they talk about a lot, man. But also they always say just you're your own team, be your own team, go in there, do your thing. So if I didn't say I wasn't excited to hopefully do that one day, I'd be nuts because that was pretty electric.
Well, it was electric to watch that, and it was electric, obviously, to be part of it for us. And, Hugh, I hope that motivates them. I would think it does, right? I mean, a couple years ago, if you just look at the parallels between the Eagles and the Phillies were the first ones to get close, right? 2022, they got to the World Series in October of 2022. They looked like they were going to be the first ones in this decade to go win a championship. And then they lost, right? And then the Eagles got there. They lost. But then I think if you had asked anyone October 2023 or October, or May 24, who's the next team to win a World Series or win a championship at Philadelphia? A year ago, a lot of people would have said the Phillies. The Phillies seemed closer. And then the Eagles just did what they did this year. I would hope that's extra motivation for them to watch another team in the city do something they're trying to do.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think because I remember when the Phillies won the World Series, even though I wasn't playing, I remember the parade down Broad Street, going to the stadium and how that felt. And the Chase Utley, world freaking champs thing, and just how everybody felt when they got to the ballpark. And I remember thinking to myself, damn, I wonder what the Eagles parade would look like. So I feel what I pick up what Bryce is putting down, because that's what you want, man. I mean, to see all those Philly fans out there be a hell of a thing. That's the first time for me that I've ever been in that type of an atmosphere. And I remember, I can't think of the young man's name that worked here at the radio station, but when they won the World Series, he was crying because he was a young cat. And
the camera?
No, it wasn't the camera.
He wasn't working.
I forgot who it was, but
that's a good guess.
He was crying, and I was just like, wow. To be in that atmosphere and to see the reaction of the fans that have been here forever.
Mm-hmm. Was it Mac now?
No, it wasn't Mac. Now, he was a young cat.
I know, I'm kidding.
Cat. But yeah, to see the reaction of the fans, it was phenomenal. And I was like, wow, I wonder what it's going to look like when the Eagles finally win one.
And then they did in 17. 215-592-9494. That's how you hop aboard. Do you still have World Series expectations for the Phillies? I feel like if we had this conversation a year ago, 9 out of 10 would have said yes, absolutely World Series expectations. I do wonder today where everyone is on this. I don't. And now, do I think they are capable? Sure. I mean, I think they'll be a playoff team, and they're still one of the, 5 to 8 best teams in baseball without question. But I don't have that expectation anymore. I think it's possible, but last year I felt it was my expectation, World Series, or it's a disaster. I don't feel the same way as we enter 2025. Kyle, where are you at? As we've heard a lot of interviews and good ones down in Clearwater the last couple of days, do you still have that World Series expectation for this Phillies team?
So I understand that a lot of people are down on the Phillies and expectations have changed after it felt like they're on a bit of a downward trajectory for a few years in a row. But if you're like an objective viewer and you're not a Phillies fan, you're a fan of another team, and I told you, I ran you through the lineup, and I ran you through this pitching staff, and I asked you, should this team have World Series expectations? I think you'd say, I don't, like, why wouldn't you? They are, without a doubt in my mind, a top 5 team in baseball right now. And if you're a top 5 team in baseball, you should go into the season with World Series expectations. Like, make no mistake about it. It's World Series or bust, and if they don't win the World Series this year, I have a lot of questions about what this group is going to look like the next year and years to come. But I really do believe that they should go into this season thinking that they are one of those teams that have a good chance to win this thing, and they should expect to. Like, did the Diamondbacks 2 years ago have World Series expectations? No. Did the Mets going into last season have World Series expectations? No. So, like, and they ended up making the run for it. Now, I know the Dodgers are out there, and the Dodgers are scary as hell. But somebody, even us or somebody else, could accidentally beat the Dodgers in a 5-game series. Hell, even if the Padres happen to screw around and win that division, and the Dodgers have to play a 3-game series, the wild card, like, that's anyone could lose in one of those games. We've seen this happen for years in the postseason format with baseball. So I know that people are down, but if you look at this team, if you zoom out a little bit and you just look up and down this roster, they have probably, I think, maybe the best pitching staff in baseball. And I know they didn't get the boost in the offseason, but man, I think Jesus Luzardo is a really, really sneaky ad. This pitching staff is going to be a lot better when you bump Taijuan Walker down and you have Luzardo and maybe Painter later in the season. Like, I just think people are sleeping a little bit on this Phillies team.
They might be, and I think that's part of the disappointment the last 2 Octobers. 215-592-9494. We got a lot to discuss here today. Your reaction to the Zach Bond signing, I love it. I am so glad they kept him off the open market. And let's talk some Phillies here. After hearing a lot of good interviews down in Clearwater, do you still have World Series expectations as we get close? We're 3 weeks away from opening day. 3 weeks from today, Zach Wheeler will be on the mound opening day. Do you still have World Series expectations for the Phillies?